Okay, and we are live about 3 seconds early for a change. And welcome to Harald Bookman from Switzerland, who lives in China and has done for a very long time and dresses Chinese. So, we're going to talk today about the two sessions. That's just wrapped up on Thursday, but we're also going to talk about how important they are to the next 5 years, because what was signed off at the end of the two sessions was the 5 year plan, which is what China does in order to say this is where we're going to be in a few years. And it doesn't mean it's locked in concrete. What it means is we've got a direction. This is where we plan to be. Now, for the next 5 years, we can change direction. We can steer it in a different way. But Harold, you're the expert on this. What's happening in the next 5 years?
Right. So yeah, thanks, Jerry, to be on your channel again. It's always great. So you've mentioned the two sessions. Does everybody know what the two sessions are? It's the Parliament and the Consultative Conference. So it's two large bodies of people. They have thousands of delegates from all across the country, from across society, from different parties, from different industries, from different ethnic minorities, to really give a great mix of people, and all delegates should report from their respective perspectives what they think is now urgently needed in the country to be addressed. And so they have debated for a week. Now you can imagine when you have thousands of people, you don't really have debates in the sense of arguing back and forth. I mean, even if you have 10 people, that gets to its limits. So it's more like they have brought in many proposals, and especially they've responded to a draft proposal of the 15th 5-year plan, which we're to discuss here today. So that proposal was made in last, I think it was October, last autumn. They've made this 15th 5-year plan proposal by the Communist Party, and they've given it to all these different institutions, different people, different groups to reflect on it and to think about what they think should be added or changed. And I think that's the core of what these two sessions now gave as an input. And in that way, they should ensure that no big topic, no real essential issue has been forgotten in this original draft. I think that way we can simply describe the whole process of decision making in the Chinese political system to ensure that people get heard, not in the sense of everybody gets to say I want this detail. I don't want a windmill next to my building or something. It's not that level of decision, but in a big picture, what's missing in the villages, what's ailing people in the big cities, what's important for the street workers, etc., etc. And so now we come to a 5-year plan, which has a few big changes. And some things not changed, but rather reinforced. And I think the first topic we can address is the topic of finance versus real industry. And I think that's a huge topic, both in China, but also in the West, and especially in Europe. In Europe, there's this expression, the deindustrialization. I think people with some political and economic awareness know about this. The UK has been deindustrializing for a long time, but Germany especially, but also France and Italy, they've kept up quite high levels of industry in their economies. So factories, real output, building cars, building machines. And they've been relatively highly industrialized as opposed to the US and the UK, which have very early on just really financialized, meaning their economies basically are banks, insurances, and investment vehicles, all just money pushing institutions that just put money into different assets and profit from the money they own rather than actually building things. And recently, continental Europe is also following that path, especially now with the inputs for energy, namely oil and gas, getting more and more expensive in Europe. It's increasingly hard for chemical industry, but also other industries to really survive. then you add in the technological progress in China, where Chinese now really are serious competitors, for example, in robotics, in cars, in more and more parts where continental European companies used to have a global advantage. Now Chinese are really catching up there as well. And so that's the big challenge. And now China, of course, itself faces this question of how to make sure that investor money gets put into building factories. Because if you have the choice to invest in a stock market where you get returns of 10%, 15%, versus investing long-term in a factory where you may get 5% returns, but the factory may also just produce things that the market doesn't want. And so it's a risk and it's slow, because the money in the factory, you build a building, you put in machines, you hire people. That's long-term investment. You cannot just pull it out the next week and then try something else. So there's an intrinsic interest of financial investors to rather invest in financial markets, which give you a lot of flexibility, give you quick returns, and give you high returns, versus the real industry where you invest in people, in machines, in producing stuff, which takes a long time to give you the returns. And just before the two sessions, actually, already China has published an important speech that was given by Xi Jinping 2 years ago in, let's say, private. I mean, it's not really private. He gave it in a Communist Party meeting. And I'm really sure that this speech has been distributed among financial institutions, financial experts, professors, and Communist Party members during these 2 years, and gotten some feedbacks from those institutions before it has been published now in a version that all these relevant institutions could agree with. And this financial strategy is really relevant. And it mentions this point that China wants finance to work for the real economy. So finance has a place in China. China is socialist. It didn't always even have a finance industry. It then at some point says, yes, we also want to have a finance industry. We want to have stock markets. We want to allow people to invest. But now this strategy has clarified, okay, we want this type of investment, but there's a purpose to it. We want that to mitigate risks that exist in the real economy. What I've said, if you build a factory and the products you produce don't match the market needs, you go bankrupt. And if you leave that to individual engineers and people in tier 2, 3 cities to build factories at their own risk, obviously they cannot finance these factories, nor can they cope with the risk of going bankrupt. So it's good to have a financial industry where rich people go in and give money to entrepreneurs who have good ideas and are willing to spend time building things. So that part is welcome. But the part of layered and structured derivatives and all this kind of trading that's going on in the US, that's something that China doesn't want. And so that's now been reinforced also in the 5-year plan to say China will continue to prioritize the real economy over the financial economy. So that was one first takeaway that I think is very important.
So effectively what China is saying is it's okay to invest. It's okay to be, to an extent, capitalist. But what you're investing in is real things, real jobs, real works, real factories, real productions. And you're not investing in other people's debt. You're not investing and trying to create more debt in order to create more profit from that debt. I noticed one of the things, because I did a little research on this economy myself, China's goal is to increase consumption. And we are going to talk about that a little later on. But American consumption is actually more than double. Even though they have a quarter of the population, their consumption, their domestic consumption is more than double. But it's mostly based on financial services, legal services, health services, and not based on buying products. So Americans are spending a lot more money. They're not getting anything for it other than paying off for services that they need just to survive. Paying for a lawyer, paying for a doctor, or an operation that they needed, or an insurance that they needed to cover that operation or that lawyer. These are the sorts of things that are different to the way we're working in China.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. And you mentioned the word consumption. We can touch upon this briefly. I didn't want to make this a main topic, but it's something that a lot of people in the West discuss a lot, that they say China has to consume more. It
Yeah.
needs to do more consumption for balance. And there's all these theories, but I think it's very important to understand one thing. So consumption does not create economic growth. Why not? Because consumption is how you use the GDP, the production that has been produced, right? So there's one side that's the production side, and then there's one side that's the use of the production side. And you can use it for investment or for consumption, whatever you produce. You make machines that either are cars that you use as consumption, you just buy the car for fun to drive around, or you produce a machine that you then use to produce new things in the future. So that's the investment side. But whether you consume it or use it for investment, that's just the direction, what kind of production you want. In the end, you have to produce the things. And in order to produce the things, you need factories, you need infrastructure, you need educated people. And all these things you only get through investment. And that's why neoclassical theory has all these very complex mathematical models to obfuscate the fact. But if you break it down in simple terms, it becomes obvious again that you produce by having machines and the kind of stuff that's called capital. And then you produce by having labor. That means the workers, including the quality of workers. So if you have people who cannot read or write, they can just stand at a conveyor belt and manually work. That's one type of labor input. And if you have highly educated engineers that can run a factory built with robots, then obviously one worker can produce much, much more. But you get to these things, both the robots and the educated worker, by investing in them. So investment is what eventually drives economic growth.
Gotcha.
And maybe you can show that one graphic about the development of the Chinese society in terms of education levels and birth rates. And I think that shows why I'm so positive on...
Is that this one?
Yeah, exactly this one. Yes, perfect. Why I'm so positive on Chinese future economic growth, because you see these dark blue pillars at the bottom that keep going up. That's the number of students newly enrolled in an institution of higher education, university, or these kind of higher education institutions per year. So you can see, even though the population growth in this light brownish tone you see in the background, that's how many people per year have turned 18. So yes, there are now less people turning 18. It's about 15 million per year in 2024, 25. It was almost 25 million people turned 18 in the year 2004. So that's 10 million less per year that now enter adulthood. There are less workers per year entering the workforce. That's correct. But if we just count the workers who have a higher degree, have a higher education, you see that at the moment, this population is still growing per year. And so that's one side, that's the production side of the equation, where I'm convinced that by having so much higher educated workers now coming into the workforce, we don't need to worry about China not being able to produce enough. Now, the point of consumption is, of course, well, you produce all these things, but what for? And indeed, that is an important question. And here's this point where people say you cannot invest everything again all the time. You need to also consume it. And I think the important part is, if we say we need to consume it in order for the economy to grow, I think we kind of miss the point of why we have an economy. That's a bit philosophical, but the point is the economic production is there to make our lives better. And we cannot be forced to consume in order to have more economic growth. I think that's just getting the horse and the cart the wrong side up. But indeed, the question is, do Chinese people need or want more things, but they cannot afford them right now, and they cannot have them because they have no money and no time. They work too much and get too little for it. So these are topics that need to be addressed. And I think at the core to that challenge is obviously higher incomes. and not just like these slogans of we need more consumption. Chinese need higher incomes, and they will come. Why do people have higher incomes? Because they're more productive. If you have higher education, you can use a lot of machines to produce things. You can do very high quality services. Obviously, you get higher salaries. So I think, again, from seeing how education is growing in China, education levels of the young population, I'm sure that people can have higher incomes and become more productive. And again, this comes from investing in people. And so this is, I think, the important relationship. It just doesn't happen overnight. Of course, you can just spray money over the population and give everybody cash to consume, but that's not sustainable. That's not how you get like a healthy society, I think.
Yeah, there's another thing that we can add to this. The blue line that shows the new university enrollments is missing, I think, one important factor. There is a massive vocational training program in China, which are not considered university. So this doesn't count that. So about 60% of all kids leaving high school have the opportunity to go to some kind of tertiary education. Now, what this is showing is that 30% are going to university, but there's another 25 to 30% all going to learn how to be plumbers, electricians, tradesmen. They're going to be that kind of thing. The people who maintain the automation and the robotics, the CNC operators, and those kind of people. They're not university students. They are vocational training graduates. I used to train a lot of them, and they're very smart people. They just didn't qualify for university, but they did end up going through some kind of vocational training, usually at least 2 years, sometimes longer. But it's what in the West we would probably call an apprenticeship. They don't really do apprenticeships here. They have vocational training colleges, and they intern people out on training programs to factories and corporations that can teach them specific skills. They may very well be learning how to operate a CNC machine, but they're now learning the AI involved in doing that. So that's something that's important to remember.
Absolutely. And even if, like, when we say, high school and vocational training and middle school, we also should remember that all of these schools have greatly improved their quality as well. Like, if you had a middle school degree 20 years ago compared to what you learn now in middle school, you obviously learn a lot more nowadays, just because the reforms in education are also happening. So there's all these levels of improvement in it sounds a bit cold to call it the quality of human capital, because we're talking about humans and what they know and can do. But from like this economic macro perspective, it makes sense to just, like, in the abstract, yes, that's what it is. There's a higher quality of workers coming into the economy. And so that's the one part that will then drive higher incomes, because they just produce higher quality products than China used to be able.
I think the other thing that's going to happen, because there are less workers and there are less need for workers, there's going to be a lot more social or free time available to the workers that do come in. This whole practice of the 996. It does still exist. I know that for a fact. In some companies, some corporations, they work people very, very hard. But for a lot of them, it's actually choice rather than need or requirement. It's a choice. They decide, I'm going to work on this project. When this project comes to fruition, I'll be 30 years old and I can retire on it. That's what they're doing this for. They're getting this workload out of the way early, and then they're retiring and buying places in their hometowns in Chengdu and Yunnan and other places that they're actually being created as millionaires. Huawei creates something like 100,000 millionaires every year. It's
really?
Pretty good, good idea.
That's crazy. I agree. Like, I'm here also in a shared office in Shanghai, and it's Saturday afternoon. There's like several desks where people are working. They're all founders, they're all startups or self-employed people who choose to work on the weekend. And that's exactly my experience as well. Whereas the companies that I've worked in before, video gaming, ByteDance, the TikTok owner, people didn't work 9. It depends on the department, especially young, fresh graduates. They usually get to work much more on more simple tasks that just take a lot of time. But in most departments, marketing, PR, operations, they have very like rather fixed work times, and they work like 9 to 7 maybe, but definitely not 9 to 9, and not 6 days a week.
There's a question here about what level will China population stabilize? I think it probably has. What China has now realized is that, I think anyway, they left the one-child policy running a couple of years too long. And then so many people said, well, I grew up without brothers and sisters, so my kid can grow up without brothers and sisters. And we're getting now there's a massive impetus to have more children. I'm not sure that China really needs more children. That's a thing I would have a dispute about the rest of the world. All these global economists who are looking at us and saying there's not enough children being born. I would say, well, there doesn't appear to be a need to have any more children being born. China's population can get smaller and smaller because it's getting smarter and smarter. What do you think?
Yes, I also think the population will probably decrease, and I think that's probably a very good thing for China. There's all these relations that people calculate, like the population per available arable land, the population per water, like drinking water availability, or per forest area, and in all these metrics, China has like way too many people. There's like these metrics that say like to be like an average self-sustaining country, China should have a population between 2 and 500 million people. So that's less than half of it, and China won't go down that far, I'm sure. But
that's less than a third of where we are now.
Yes, exactly, because China just has always had a very dense population. And in the last 100 years, Chinese population has more than doubled. And the PRC was founded, I think it was around 500-600 million people, which already was a huge country at the time, but it's more than doubled since then. And in the graph that we just saw, there's one more thing that's hidden in there, or not hidden, but if you look at it, it becomes fairly obvious, because you have the brown line, not the dotted line. The brown line shows how many live births, exactly, how many children are born each year. Now you can basically calculate forward from when people turn 18 until they give birth. And you see that in the 2003, 4, 5, there was like this downwards trend. And then it slowly goes up around 2016. And you see the spike in 2004 in people turning 18. And what I think this graph really shows is that the time when people start having kids has extended more and more. So in the past, when you have 10% or less going to university, it's totally normal that women start to work around 16, 18, start just in their jobs. At 20, 22, you start to really think, why don't I have a kid already? And, when you're 24, you typically would have your first child. And nowadays, you go to university, you graduate around 24, 25, you first want to have some job experience, you want to find a suitable match. If you haven't found him at university, you're typically 30 at least to have your first kid, 30, 35. So there's like this gap of 5 to 10 years where people are now older to have children. And I think that in part explains why this line goes down so much starting 2017, when people just have more and more university and vocational training education than before. And at the same time, it's already somewhat smaller cohorts than the previous ones. But I also do think, because this is an effect that pulls giving birth, kind of, pulls the timing apart, there will be some rebound. I think it will come up a bit again, although not to 30 million newborns a year. I think those times are over. So I don't know where it will stabilize, if it will stabilize. Like countries typically don't have very stable population. It grows and then it grows back again and it grows up again. So we'll see. But I think it's very possible to have less than 1 billion Chinese at one point without a society collapse. And I think that's the core issue, that it's not a reason for collapse anymore.
Okay. So we discussed the demographics. We've just discussed the real economy. Do you want to move on to the science and technology that you wanted to talk about?
Yes, and I think it goes well with the point made by XYYYC there the comment in the chat. So China has a roadmap set for 5 years and does not get scrapped in the next sitting committee. And that's very true. These plans, they build upon each other, and they are part of the big picture, which is the 100 years goals, the 100-year struggles goals. So by 2049, China wants to be a strong country. The official slogan is something like rich and strong and civilized and democratic and beautiful socialist strong country. So it's a bit long term, and over the year they kept adding words. Harmonious was one that they've added during Hu Jintao's time.
Judicial as well. So it's legal, judicial.
Ruled by law, exactly. Yeah. And then the beautiful is a relatively recent addition to it.
That actually came from Hu Jintao, who said way back in 2003, I think, thereabouts, when he set up the scientific development program and said, basically, we need to slow down our growth. Our growth in double digits has been great, but not at the expense of our rivers, our trees, our mountains, our farms, our people, and our health. And that's from that moment on. And this is where we've seen Xi Jinping has followed that in a big way. And in fact, Xi Jinping has implemented most of what Hu Jintao suggested. It was a big suggestion from Hu Jintao and a move towards it, but it's really the last 12 years.
Yes, a lot of things build upon each other, and I think that's a very important part. And now, if you want to show that graphic. So one important thing that fell away in this 5-year plan in terms of industrial focus is the electric vehicles. So you see, these are now the 6 what they call emerging pillar industries. So that means these 6 are industries that are now expected to really take off. Basically, their technology is in place. They can do things. They are selling already products. And I apologize for the picture of intelligent robots, because it's exactly not humanoid, actually. It's production robots rather than humanoids.
Automation would be a better word than robotics, I think.
Automation. And, well, it is robots, and that's the official term as well, but it's not humanoid robots. We'll come to them in a moment. So these are industries where China already produces and sells stuff, and it's actually already big industries, but they're expected to double by 2030. So you have to imagine these 6 put together, they will have, maybe one a bit faster than the other, but combined, they're expected to have at least 14-15% growth per year in the coming 5 years. So they will double by 2030. Integrated circuits, that's basically microchips, but like the big picture of microchips, including where they're put on and put together, and with the whole value chain, really from the silicon to the end product. Then aerospace, that also includes like airplanes, big body airplanes. The German chancellor was in China, I think it's 2 weeks ago now. I was very excited to have signed a deal with Airbus for 120 big airplanes. It's a big deal. It will give a lot of cash initially to Europe. But I've since read that China made clear that they expect these Airbus to be assembled in China. And people who know about the car industry know what happens when European technology gets assembled in China. There are a lot of very capable Chinese engineers who look very closely how it's done in the German European way. And they'll end up doing the same thing themselves later on. So expect the same thing. If not better, exactly.
So, they tend to look at it and go, what's this little thing? Oh, I can do this better. And then we've got an improvement. Or the Japanese used to miniaturize, the Chinese seem to improve, innovate.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, the Chinese, what they were excellent at is to do a similar quality at much simpler tech and lower price, not just because labor is cheap, but really because they optimized or simplified the tech to produce things. And nowadays, they also really have caught up in quality. So yes, Chinese
they've done exactly the same thing with AI, which is a very different topic. But there was a report in the China Daily today that AI in China has now officially overtaken AI in terms of usage in America. So Americans using AI are
Wow.
sending their questions to China for responses back. They're called tokens, traveling backwards and forwards through this fiber optic line across the Pacific Ocean. So there's more. This was in the China Daily just today. So China
Yeah.
has done it because it stripped back the complexities and said we can do this in a much shorter, simpler way. And it's,
Yeah.
of course, that's reduced the costs. It's reduced the power generation, which has reduced the heat, which means it reduces the cooling required. And all of the things that were causing the cost blowouts in the United States are now causing efficiencies here in China. So, yeah,
Yeah.
this is exactly what they do. Simplify.
Plus, China does it in AI. Just as a side note, China works a lot with open source. So they tell you
Yes.
their source codes. You can just take it, you can download it on your own server and use the Chinese methods. And that's just very, very interesting for startup founders. If you're
Yes.
worried about your IP, you don't want to have your startup tech run over a cloud server where OpenAI technically could see everything you do with the AI. You'd much rather have it on your own servers where you use the method developed in China, but you just keep it inside, basically. So, yeah,
One of the
AI.
big things on this, I understand biomedicine, aerospace, new energy storage or new type storage. Low altitude economy is an interesting one because this seems to me in the West to be relatively ignored. All the rest of these
Yeah.
are overtaking the West. They're using very similar but simplified and cheaper technologies. Low altitude economy seems to me to be something that the West has. They've taken drones and they've used drones for warfare, for observations.
Yeah.
China has used it in an entirely different way, hasn't it?
Yes, low altitude economy. I've really spent quite some time last year to dig into this topic, and it is very interesting. And you're right, the West is kind of sleeping on it. One thing is delivery drones. There are these kind of headline grabbing examples. There's a park, I think, is it Shenzhen or Guangdong, where you can order your milk tea with a drone and you can see how it's delivered to this
Yeah.
like place where the drone drops off one milk tea after another, and everybody enjoys it because of novelty. But it's much more relevant for example, delivery to offshore oil platforms. There are hundreds of people working on a platform. They need all kinds of supplies for their lives, but also for the job. And that's very expensive to supply to them. Those platforms, if you've ever seen pictures of them, they're dozens of meters above the water level. You cannot just send a ship and climb up. It's quite complex. So mostly you want to fly there. And now China is testing all these heavy drones. They're they can carry a ton of load or several hundred kilograms of load. And they fly electric, so they can replace helicopters for these kind of cargo missions. And they do this now as a test to really see the safety and really test those heavy-duty cargo drones. But the eventual point where that goes is obviously if you can carry 500 kilogram, you can carry six people, or 4 people plus luggage. And so that's the point where this may be going, is to have electric flying vehicles that really allow for 3-dimensional traffic, where you can, instead of standing in a traffic jam, you take one of these flying taxis and fly to the airport with an electric thing. Or for rescue, we do have in Switzerland, I don't know, in other countries in Europe, I think as well, where you have like the helicopters to pick up people if there's a heavy traffic accident and somebody's really heavily injured. They pick them up with a helicopter. In China, this rarely exists. I don't think it does exist. And it obviously is important in places like Chinese big cities with all the traffic jams. But the problem with helicopters is, of course, the air pollution. And if you can do this electric, the noise pollution as well. Electric, these eVTOLs, flying machines are much lower in noise, and they don't have the exhaust. Now, there's setbacks, there's drawbacks as well, because they use smaller rotors than a helicopter. They're less efficient from an aerodynamic perspective. So there's a lot of debate in the West. Is that the right way to go? Is this useful? Is it efficient? Whereas, as usual, the Chinese just do it and experiment, and try to find out in which scenarios is it efficient. Because sometimes you may say from an aerodynamic perspective, it's not the most efficient, but from a cost perspective, it's way simpler to produce, to have like 10, 12 small rotors that are electric and don't need any adjustment. They don't need any flapping hinges like a helicopter does. And because you have so many rotors, you can just fly very precisely the all directions, three-dimensional flight. And you can automate this flying to have autonomous flying machines much simpler than by using helicopters. And so that's this holistic approach to say, well, it may not be efficient from this perspective, but overall in this scenario, this is still the better solution. Plus, it helps China to get rid of oil dependency, obviously, by doing it electric. And another thing that I also want to point out is with EVs, 10, 15 years ago, electric vehicles were horrible. They had a range of, 80 kilometers, max speed of about the same, and could never compete with gasoline cars. But the Chinese started producing them, put them on the market to get some market feedback while improving the technology in all levels, engines, batteries, safety, etc. And now they're top cars, electric cars. They're definitely very competitive compared to gasoline cars. And I think the same thing is in airspace. Now, low altitude economy, as a last sentence, is not just the flying machines themselves, the drones or eVTOLs. It's really the whole airspace, the lower airspace, the bottom 3,000 meters of the country that are opening up to be used for commercial activity. So this can also include like drone shows, but also to run heliports, the places where these machines are landing, or the drone launching stations for logistics, and all kinds of things. So anything that can be done. And a very important part where they earn a lot of money already is maintenance flights. So for example, when you have like the long cross-country electricity lines, the high voltage electricity lines, as for now, basically you have really people driving by car along those, and at every what are they called, posts or mast, they have to stop.
Pylon.
They may have to climb up. They may have to look closely if everything's in order. And repeatedly, every couple of weeks, you have to check every position of the whole electricity grid to make sure nothing's broken. You can imagine what that costs in a country the size of China to have people all across the country to look at all electricity lines. Now you can just have
some very big electric lines.
True. And now you can just have drones flying along them, and you see it from very up close. You can zoom in, you have good cameras. It's way cheaper, and it's even better because the quality is better. You cannot climb up onto every mast, so usually you don't see it from up close by the foot patrols. And same thing for railway lines, the high-speed railway, to really ensure that they're maintained well, for highway patrols, etc., etc. So this is all part of this low-altitude economy.
I was lucky enough to go to EHang, the company that makes might even make the drone that's visible there. And I got to sit in an autonomous drone, which took off and took me on a couple of minutes spin around the block. It's quite an exciting moment to be up there on your own. There's no driver, just sitting in this thing, going, what the hell? But it only got up to 30 meters. It seemed to me to be a lot higher. I'm not good with heights, but it was 30 meters. And one of the things I saw at that company, they have a showroom there. What Kevin says here, they're introducing it for meals, medicines, and packages in rural communities. They're doing the same in China. It's already operating in China. And one of the great things I saw was a drone that it looked like rockets on the top. And I said, is this military? Because it's painted red. It's odd. And he said, no, these weapons, the weapon appearance thing, the barrels on the top, they hold fire suppressant. So these things fly up. When there's a fire in an apartment on the 30th floor, you don't need to get ladders up there. You fly this thing up to the 30th floor and you fire a cask of fire suppressant, which on impact explodes and completely smothers the fire. And that is just superb, thinking about how you can do that kind of thing rather than getting 10 guys up on these massive, great big ladders and trying to put hose pipes into the 30th or the 50th floor. And how do you do it? This is the way to do it now.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things. Also, agriculture. I was talking yesterday to a girl
Agriculture,
that we haven't
definitely.
seen. My wife and I were at a wedding yesterday, and we bumped into someone we haven't seen for years. Oh, what are you doing these days? And she says, "I'm learning how to fly drones." Oh, really?
Cool.
What for videos? No, 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 no. For drone operations, so she can do all of these things that we've just talked about. It's pretty impressive stuff, and she's going
Yeah.
through a training course right now on that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's many. There's even like this idea of cleaning skyscrapers using drones, to have
Yeah.
like the water
She said
blowing
that
out of
cleaning
drones
windows,
in the
but she
windows.
said it's still better to clean windows from the top down rather than using a drone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
For the moment.
If you want to be perfectly clean, I'm sure it's just way cheaper to just hose it down, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
and and these are scenarios. The new type energy storage. I just want to briefly mention this because people think of batteries, car batteries at first. Maybe the important thing here is the incredible scale of Chinese battery production. At
Hmm.
first they came out to produce these car batteries for NEVs. Now the top quality with like highest energy density, these are the batteries used in the low altitude economy to have like these super heavy eVTOLs and drones to be powered. But there's a lot of capacity for lower grade, lower quality batteries. And where you can use those is grid energy storage. That means
Mm.
a big problem with solar energy and wind energy is you don't really know when the energy comes, and it's not necessarily the moments when people want to use
When
the
you need it.
energy. And with electricity, you really need to have balance in the grid at every second of the day. So now you just install tons of batteries in places where a lot of people use electricity and in the places where electricity is generated. So whenever you have excess electricity, you charge all these batteries across the grid. And whenever there's a big need for electricity, you just use it from the batteries to bridge over these periods where you have no wind or it's dark or has heavy clouds. That is basically an enabler for clean energy. So
Mm.
combined wind, solar, and batteries is a completely new ball game in terms of clean energy. And so this is why this is also very relevant for fighting climate change and just cleaning up the energy supply. So I think this is another very interesting technology.
Good. So this is the emerging pillar industries now. Should we move on to the next diagram
Yeah,
and
now it
talk
really
about,
gets fancy because, as
yeah,
I mentioned, those sticks, they would double in the next 5 years in terms of total industrial output.
yes, so
And these
15% a year growth, yeah.
Right. And these here are those expected to possibly be the next six in a couple of years in the future. And, some embodied intelligence, that's actually the humanoid robots. They already exist, but for now, they're more like fancy toys. They're in a development stage. They're shown, they're cool for videos, but the applications aren't really ready. So there's no big business at the moment producing humanoid robots.
No,
But it may become huge, obviously, if they start working in factories or if they have really the robot nannies. I'm not sure about those, to be honest. I think they take a lot of space for now, at least. I don't know if I would want to waste my precious space for a robot at home. But anyway, so that's an option. And then 6G mobile networks, we kind of know what that is, but it's more. It's not just faster download speeds. It's also about the like the amounts that can be transmitted at the same time, and then really crazy things like brain computer interface, where you can just by thinking communicate with a computer. I find it in a way scary, this thought that computers could read out your brain. So I don't know how exactly it will work. I mean, there are very positive scenarios as well, like if you have, you've lost a leg, you've lost an arm, you
disabilities,
can
yeah.
have you can have like really by brain control your artificial arm. I mean, that's an incredible thought.
Mm,
Maybe a bit
mm.
niche, but like these kind of things. And of course, combined with the humanoid robots, that you can just actually use your brain to control the movement of a humanoid robot. I think it just
Yeah.
sounds very, very crazy to me, like very fancy. biomanufacturing as well. That's like a really science fiction kind of idea. For example, silk. Silk is a very strong, powerful material, not just for silk clothes, but actually for some industrial applications. It's very, very useful. And other materials that are produced by animal cells. But at the moment, silk is produced, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's like you have like these silkworms and they go into a cocoon, and then you take their cocoon and really roll off the string that
Unwind it.
they've
Yeah.
produced. And it's kind of bloody, it's insects. So it's not really like, maybe not as emotional, but when you see it, it's kind of ugly, like you really kill those insects and take off their cocoon. So now what they do, they use like single cell organisms where they implant the silk producing part of the cell, and then have like these big tanks. And in the tank, these organisms just produce that silk, and then it just gets taken out of a big tank and pulled into strings. So you have industrial scale production of animal output that can be automated and doesn't need to actually kill animals. So that's kind of a fancy thing. Plus they can add all kind of things so that it produces not just silk. There's like all kinds of things that can be produced by microorganisms, and thereby like increase efficiency, automation, and produce materials that so far haven't been possible to produce at scale.
I remember years ago reading something, many, many years ago, before I knew anything about what DNA was or anything like that, reading about how scientists were trying to replicate the spider's web because it is 16 times stronger than high tensile steel of the same width. So it's pretty good stuff if you can do that. And China just yesterday or the day before announced that they've got a carbon fiber thread, and it's the thickness of a human hair, and it's strong enough to pull. And they demonstrated this one thread of this thing, which is slightly thicker than a human hair, pulled a fully loaded intercity bus down a street. Yeah. So that was something I saw the other day. I mean, that's not biomanufacturing, but it's something that is just a massive boost. And of course, it's great for space travel and things like that, because it's virtually indestructible. It's incredibly lightweight. It's lighter than thread. So there's a lot of things going for that.
And yes, exactly. If this can be produced by an organism, then it can be mass produced at low cost with biomanufacturing. It actually reminds me a lot. I don't know if people have read the Three Body, the first part of the Three Body. It's a science fiction book from China, and in that they have like such a thread of extremely strong fiber, and they just pull it across the just what's the canal called in America? The Panama Canal.
The Panama Canal,
and in that way they just cut a big ship with the bad guys on it, and cut the bad guys and the ship when it drives through a net of these threads. They're invisible, obviously, from a distance. You wouldn't see a hair, right? But it's pulled across that canal, and the ship just drives through it, and everybody is cut apart. So,
wow.
So yeah, that's
a good book to read.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have to try and get it.
And then quantum technology is another insane thing that we know exists, but now it's a combination of two things. It's quantum communications and quantum computing. And I like both of them are really incredible technologies. Quantum communication uses like the quantum, what's it called? That like quants move in the same direction no matter how far they're apart from each other, and that can be used for basically unbreakable encryption of communication. So you cannot decode the encryption between 2 points of communication. So it's a very, very safe method of communication. And China is leading in this technology already. And quantum computing, again, uses some like quantum physical properties to have an incredible amount of compute. And quantum entanglement, I think that's what it is about. And quantum computing, again, I wouldn't claim to understand exactly how it works. I just know that they say with quantum computing, they could just do create computers that are just like millions of times faster than the fastest supercomputers at the moment. And they could basically crack all traditional encryption. And so the one who has it first could theoretically break into all kinds of secret, like spaces, digital spaces of their enemies. So it's also a security topic to be leading in this technology. But at the same time, you can obviously also use it in positive ways to really have unseen levels of compute available for all kinds of computing problems that we can think of, but so far cannot solve. So yeah, these are really fancy technologies. Green hydrogen, I'm not exactly sure why green hydrogen is such a huge topic, because hydrogen, I mean, generally the idea is you can use electricity again from solar and wind when it's excessively available, and then you split water into O2 and hydrogen. And the hydrogen can later be used to again create electricity. It burns very well. It can be used in fuel cells. So it's a very good energy storage. And fusion energy is like the holy grail of energy production, because it's basically unlimited if you can really use it to create energy by nuclear fusion. It uses very small amounts of material. It produces huge amounts of energy, and it cannot explode like traditional nuclear reactors. So so these are some really strong
different
breakthroughs.
ways. I noticed Hammer put this sodium all the way, that the sodium, thorium, these kinds of technologies, they are in use already in China experimentally. And sodium seems like a good one because it uses salt, which is a byproduct of desalination, which allows you to use water from the ocean, and therefore, instead of pushing the brine back into the ocean and therefore contaminating the water or changing the water level, the sodium level of the water, you then got yourself an alternative use for that sodium. So yeah, this is all going well, all going swimmingly well.
Yeah.
I wanted
Sodium also. Yeah. No. Okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to add to the before we moved on from it, biomanufacturing. There is a company in America which has patented the use of mushrooms to create leather, and they're in New York. They literally have created. This is an American corporation, so it's good to see America still has something of this kind. They have a warehouse in New York where they can produce literally sheets and sheets of consistently good leather without killing any animals, just using mushrooms. And of course, the byproduct of that is soup. So you can feed the masses as well. And it's as simple as that. They take it literally, the skin of this mushroom can be kind of, I don't know how they do it, splice it together so it's seamless. And it's being used for car seat covers and things like that. And you have to be a real expert to be able to tell the difference. But it's not what we used to call pleather. It's not fake leather. It's actually a new form of a skin which is being used, and it's skin of mushrooms.
No, and I think you gave a very important keyword, which is, Americans, even also Europeans, they have excellent experts, very creative people. The Americans attract talent from all over the world. They have a lot of technology available. I'm not saying that the US does not have very competitive technology and creative ideas. And I think that's a core issue that I keep trying to say. The Chinese are better and superior economically and in terms of innovation because they have a better leadership, because they have these plans like we see right here. Because what these plans mean now, every city, you know that as well, has this very, very strong KPIs by the central government that they need to improve. They need to provide better jobs. They need to improve the overall GDP of their city. For that, they need to attract interesting companies. They need to have interesting industries. And in order to be competitive in the incredibly competitive market of China, you need to have industry clusters, because a company can only survive if the whole value chain is nearby, and therefore it has like these economies, because they're fast and they have everything together. They can innovate together with the suppliers, etc. So you need to really create new clusters of industry if you want to develop your city. So what do mayors and people in charge of cities, and we talk about, 2 million, 5 million, even for smaller cities, these are big economic entities. Mayors of these economic entities, what do they do if they say, like, okay, we have to do something for the future growth of our economy here, we want to attract something, we get a budget from the central government, what do we propose to the government that we would do with the money if they give it to us? Well, obviously they look at these plans and they go, okay, biomanufacturing, we have, some companies that do chemistry, we have a lot of bioengineering already. Let's build a university dedicated to biomanufacturing with like 5,000 students that all learn topics related to that, including the supply chain. And then with the university together, we also do these and these policies to attract new innovative companies and startup founders to come to our city of all cities in China to build their biomanufacturing experiment here. And by having all this come together at the same time, we create an incentive for all the suppliers to set up shop in our city as well. And so everything comes together in one place and they have the next Silicon Valley for the next industry. And that's why these plans are so important, because they get put in practice by the locations that use them to plan their own economic future. And that's exactly what's missing in Europe and the US. It's not the startups, but if you have a startup in one place in the US and the supplier is somewhere else, and the other supplier is from China anyway, because nobody thought about the supply chain in advance, let alone do dedicated research centers to have the whole supply chain in one location. That's why you're lost if you're trying to build a successful startup in the US or Europe and then compete with the Chinese.
You've just about described the Greater Bay Area where I live. The Greater Bay Area just recently announced that its budgets and its achievements from the last year. So just a couple of weeks before the two sessions, we have our own local two sessions, the Guangdong two sessions. Yeah, and exactly. I actually interviewed a deputy from the local Provincial People's Congress a couple of days ago, Aggie, who lives in Dongguan. She's a lovely lady. And if anyone's interested in seeing how the National People's Congress works, this is a person to watch. This is a person to talk to. Mm-hmm. But what you just described there, it epitomizes where I live. I am right in the middle of the Greater Bay Area. There's a river that runs straight through, cuts the Greater Bay Area in half. It's called the Pearl River. On one side of the river is Hong Kong at the mouth, and the other side of the river is Macau. And I'm halfway between Macau and Guangzhou. And so literally right in the middle. What they've done here is they've built two new bridges over the last few years. One of them comes from Hong Kong. So it's from Hong Kong Airport through Hong Kong City and then into Macau. And the other one comes from Shenzhen, directly straight into the southern end, very close to Zhuhai, the next city down south from us. But very close to that. They have built on both of these locations where the bridges come off, they have built exactly what you're talking about. University complexes, supply chain complexes, research and development laboratories. And basically they've said, these are the future. And it's worked because the Hong Kong bridge has been in place for about, I think, 5 or 6 years. The other one has been in place just a year and a half or 2 years, maybe. And what has happened is Zhongshan, just my little city, small city, only 4.5 million people, which makes it, I think, the second or third biggest city in Europe. But it's a small city by Chinese standards, has emerged as a much higher, the GDP of Zhongshan is improving, but not just the GDP, the standard of living. We're seeing it improving almost. You could almost say on a daily basis, but anyone who goes away for a month comes back and sees changes. There's a new restaurant opened there. There's a new shopping center being developed there. There's a new road going to there. That's how it's all worked. And it's all happened in the last maybe 10 years since they started saying this is going to be the Greater Bay Area, not the Pearl River Delta anymore. It's the Greater Bay Area. They wanted it to be a new Silicon Valley, California, San Diego, all added together. They did that, and they've actually achieved it because now the revenue of this region has overtaken the revenue of Silicon Valley. Of course, there's a lot more people here. There's 110 million people living in the Greater Bay Area, so it's a big area. But that infrastructure that you just described epitomizes exactly what I've watched grow in the last few years.
Right. And it's not just there. That's the point. It's all across the country that they do this. Obviously,
Yep.
not all of them have as good resources as the Greater Bay Area, which is one of the richest areas of China. But the same, of course, around Shanghai as well. You know, Shanghai itself, Hangzhou, and
Hangzhou,
then
yeah.
Hefei Nanjing is another example where they build up around aerospace and electric vehicles, where, you know, one after another, they put things in place. And yeah, that's really a good example how it works and how China moves forward. It's not that they're superhumans, but it's that they have excellent leadership and excellent planning capacities at the top level. And this whole top down, I think in the beginning you mentioned something about how the plans are. They're not rigid command economy plans that they say this
They're
factory has to
directional.
produce that much of this, right? Their directions and their coordination tools that coordinate technology with capital, with infrastructure, with government investments and everything, so that it helps each other rather than hinders each other.
Yeah, I didn't realize this. The 55-kilometer long length of Auckland region, just one bridge, Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai Bridge is the length of Auckland in New Zealand. I didn't know that.
Wow.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, interesting.
That's a good little trivia to have in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered emerging economies. Now, you wanted to talk about consumption, and I think we should probably touch on that for a couple of minutes.
Well, yeah, but we already have. I think in the beginning we've spoken about how consumption should be driven by rising incomes, by improving the output coming from employees, rather than by just having like a nanny state that gives money to people so they consume more. I think this happens in parallel as well, and I expect more will come in terms of social insurance, you know, old age insurance, kind of, so that people are more willing to spend the money they have on consumption rather than feeling the need to save for their old age or for sickness. But I think the core message that I see is, if you want to increase consumption, the best way is to develop the economy and to produce better goods. And then people will earn more, which then allows them. And maybe on a global scale also, it's important to see, yes, China has this huge trade surplus, more than $1 billion last year, and it will continue to grow this year. Exports and imports grew around 20% each in the first 2 months of this year. So yes, China is a huge trading powerhouse. But in terms of the whole GDP of China, China does not trade excessively much. It's not like China, you know, depends on exporting for a third of its GDP or so. No, it's much, much lower. So China just is now a very, very big economy. So if they have like 5%, 10% exports, then that's a huge absolute amount.
Yep. Consumption expenditure was 52% of economic growth last year. That was one of the figures that came out of the two sessions. So consumption expenditure was 52% of growth. In the US, it was 2.4% of growth. So that does tell you something about consumption. We had a disaster at home a week or so ago. Absolute disaster. My coffee machine broke down. Now, for me and my wife, that's a disaster because she drinks more coffee than me. But the coffee machine broke down. So we were chatting with some friends. We were in Hong Kong a few days ago and chatting with some friends there. And they said, oh, get this brand of, and I'm not going to advertise which brand I got, but it's a good coffee machine. Get this brand of coffee. So we got home and we looked at it. Yeah, here's one. It looks like it will suit our purposes. Of course, we go onto the tutorials on YouTube and we look at this. Yeah, this will do. So my wife decided to buy it. And it said, she got an option. Do you have one to trade in? We've got a broken coffee machine. Do you have one to trade in? And she, yes, we do. Okay, you get 200 RMB discount. So we'll take that old one away from you. So that's consumption stimulation. So if I wanted to buy a new computer, I just take in my old one. They'll take everything off the hard drive and give it and take it away. Give me my data and take away the shell of the computer, and then give me a few hundred RMB off the cost of the next one. This is the kind of thing that works, I think, a lot better than sending everybody a $1,200 check, which is only used mostly to pay off a debt that they had outstanding.
Yeah,
So it's being
exactly.
used not to stimulate the economy, but to harden the debts,
Investment again.
soften
And
the blow.
yes, in the last few years, they also did these consumption loans that you can borrow money for consumption. And I would never do it myself. If I think about it, I would never take a loan from a bank to, just buy stuff or go on vacation, because in the end you have to pay it back and
That's
you have
right.
to pay an interest rate on it. So why would you do that instead of just using such a loan and pay back? As you said, if you still have an outstanding debt on your apartment, which is common in China, you'd rather take that money, and it's not allowed, but you find a way to give it to someone in the family and then give it back. And then in the end, you give the money to reduce your mortgage, and that reduces your interest payments. And I think that's just what Chinese automatically will do, rather than say, oh, cool, I get access to a loan, so let's have a holiday. I don't think that's in the cultural
Yeah,
DNA of
I
China.
think we changed. I'm not sure about you when you came here, but I lived on credit in the West. I had several credit cards. Quite often, I was paying one credit card off the other one, borrowing money from one to pay off another.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually illegal in China. You cannot borrow money legally. Of course, you can, but you cannot legally borrow money to pay a debt in China.
Yeah,
So if you've got a credit card debt, you can't go to the bank and say, "Hey, can I borrow some money?" Because they'll say, "No, you've got a debt here." They're just not going to let
yeah,
you borrow money until you
yeah,
sorted out that debt. So there's a lot less people. There's also a cultural difference here in China. People don't go into debt to get things. And even if they are in debt, they want to clear it off before the end of the Chinese New Year, before the beginning of the Chinese New Year. So at the end of each year, they try and clear off what little debts they have. But yeah, a lot of
yeah,
people did buy cars. It boosted the car consumption. A lot of people got these 5% deposits, and you can get a car and run it around. But the great thing about that is running a car, if it's an EV in particular, running a car costs virtually nothing in China. You just
yeah.
a few RMB to charge this thing
Yeah,
up. It doesn't cost very
yeah,
much at all. It's not like you're going to the fuel station and spending 600 or 700 RMB, which has now gone
yeah.
up to 800 RMB because of what's going on the other side of the world. So yeah,
I wouldn't know. I'm driving electric, and you're right. I spend less than $100 per month for my
on a
electric
car.
car. Yeah, it's just very, very cheap. And for 3 years, not anything for, maintenance or fixing the car. It's very, very low costs to run and own an electric vehicle.
I do not own a car, and I mean I haven't driven a car since 2005, and
Wow.
I would say I've saved myself tens of thousands of dollars, not RMB, dollars, in terms of not owning a car. Because if I'm going
Right.
locally, I'll walk. If I'm going a little further, I'll get on my bike. If I'm going a little
Mhm.
further than that, I just call Didi, and it's 10, 12
Taxi
RMB to go the
services
other
are
side of the
very
city.
cheap in China. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
You mentioned the other side of the planet. Maybe we just do another short 10 minutes on
Yeah,
the
let's have a
military
10-minute
side.
discussion about what's going on in the West Asia region, the area that we all used to call the Middle East.
Yes, I was mostly focusing on the military also of China, but yeah, we can maybe put those two together,
Yeah.
because in the new, like, what also was decided is a raise by 7% of military spending by China. And
Yeah, I saw that.
so they're like, oh, that's more than GDP growth. Oh, they're spending more on military again, because it's been growing by 7% for many years now. And here's, I think, a very important thing to keep in mind, which is the military spending per person. If we calculate it that way, China really spends very, very little on defense. And in China, you can also really call it defense, the military spending. In the US, I wouldn't say that's defense. It's
You
definitely
you
the
took the
war
words
budget.
out of my mouth there.
Right. And I mean, their war secretary himself kind of admits as much by renaming his department. So yes, Chinese do defend themselves. They don't do wars. And of course, when you have 1.4 billion people, $200 per person gets you quite far.
True.
But it's really reasonable to have this level of spending. It's not impoverishing China to spend 200 per person. And also, if we look at the per GDP, of course, Chinese have lower incomes than Americans or Germans or Swiss. So the Swiss are spending 700 per person, but in terms of GDP, the Swiss are spending even less than the Chinese. Swiss spend less than 1% of GDP for military. The Chinese are around 1.4%. The Germans have increased. They used to be at similar levels than China. Like most Europeans used to be at those levels, 1.5, 1.6% of GDP. The
But
Germans have
NATO,
now increased to more than 2%. They promised NATO to go to 2%, and now they're even above 2%. So they're increasing their war budgets massively. Like within 2 years, 50% up and more. So they really increased their military budgets a lot. And
well,
even in that,
if we could kind of put a caveat on that, even though we may all disagree on this or whether or not this is true, but the Germans see a threat now from Russia. They see a threat, whether that be right or wrong, I don't know, but they see a threat from Russia, and they have increased their military spending because there is a threat. The Swiss don't so much see a threat. They have this famed neutrality. I don't think anyone is going to march into Switzerland, but the Germans, or at least some aspect of the Germans, do believe that someone is going to march into Germany. Whether that's right or wrong doesn't matter. There's a perception there, and let's assume that for some people that perception is real, particularly in government, and the military-industrial complex would love it to be real. So they have done that. Now, the difference between China and America is that no one has ever invaded mainland America. China has been invaded several times, many times, in fact, and by Americans as well. If we go back to the Eight Nations Alliance, America was there. We go back to the Opium Wars, America was there. China has been invaded, and spending on defense is very different to spending that America does, because it's absolutely necessary. They have experienced invasions and they have credible threats. Sitting in Japan, sitting in Korea, sitting in Mongolia, Kazakhstan, India even, there are credible threats which mean that China needs to defend itself.
Yeah,
what's the problem?
definitely. And I think Japan is a good keyword, because Japan has increased its military budget a lot recently as well. And some commenters said, yeah, they have to, because China is increasing it so much. But in the last 5 years, the Japanese defense budget has increased by 60%, and that's
it's now well above the NATO requirement of 2%, and they're not even in NATO.
Exactly, and they're supposedly not prepared to do any work because the Constitution says it's only for self-defense. Yeah. So yeah, I understand that the Chinese are worried. I still think there's no real threat from Japan, but I know that there is a military threat to China, and we all know where it comes from. Because if we look to West Asia, they don't even need a moral justification anymore. They just bomb, and they just say, well, bad guys in Iran. I cannot tell how the Iranian government is towards the Iranians, but I'm quite sure that nobody wants to be bombed by the US, have their capital bombed every day because they don't like their government.
Under United Nations Charter, under international law, it makes no difference how bad the Iranians are to their people, the Iranian regime, as they keep calling it. It doesn't matter if they did, which I don't believe for a second, did kill 30,000, 50,000 or 90,000 of their own people. None of those numbers stack up. It doesn't matter. It does not justify an invasion. And then this use of the preemptive, we were acting in self-defense because we had credible intelligence. There has never been any credible intelligence to say Iran was just about to. And the same thing will apply with China. There is no credible intelligence anywhere at any time, because it's not going to happen, that China is going to invade anybody in the world, let alone its own province of Taiwan. But anywhere, there's no credible evidence. China is not preparing to invade anything or anyone. So there can't possibly be a preemptive strike. But of course, international law and the rules-based order are very, very different things. The rules-based order says, well, we felt a threat, so we're going to go. And that's why we could have a war.
And yes, this is the sad situation we're in right now, that really international law is very much disappearing, and Europe is very much on the side of the US in terms of dismantling this whole idea of international law by now siding with the US in this illegal war of aggression, while urging India and China to condemn Russia for an illegal invasion into Ukraine, which, I mean, for Russia, at least you can kind of see why they would attack in Ukraine, because they feel threatened by NATO. I think outside of Europe, one can say this because most people are aware of it. But the US definitely has absolutely no reason to feel threatened by Iran. It just doesn't make any sense on any, like,
Israel felt threatened by Iran. That's the reason that
yeah,
they're
but
there.
why? I mean, yes, exactly.
Why?
And
A good
now they
question. Why? If anyone can actually put that into words, the reality of it, not just there was a threat, there was a credible threat, we had intelligence, but put it into words, what was going to happen? I've never yet heard that. I'm
yes.
noticing something very interesting, and I'm gonna put this out there to the world because I'm in a group where this got raised this morning. JD Vance is being touted now as being anti this war, although supportive of the president publicly. Behind the scenes, a lot of people, Politico reported this today or yesterday, that JD Vance is not pro the Iranian war, which we can call it a war, even though they haven't legally
Yeah.
defined it as one. But the Iranian, the assault on Iran, the invasion of Iran, the war in Iran, whatever you want to call it, JD Vance apparently has gone on the record as saying, I'm opposed to it. And I see this as being a very positive step towards when this all turns to, which it's going to turn very soon, and Trump loses all degree of popularity, they can remove Trump and put Vance in there because he didn't go along with it. And I see this as kind of smoothing the path forward for JD Vance. And I also see that as an extremely dangerous move because I don't think he's any better. And if anything, I think he'll be even worse for the American people. Now, he might be good for the people of Iran who stop getting bombs dropped on their heads. And that would be a great thing, of course. But if Vance takes over in America, I think then we're going to see, the Americans are going to see complete control from the technocrats. The technologies are going to take over their entire world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on US politics. I think it sounds to me a lot like Kabuki theater. They present Vance as the one opposing, like they presented Trump as the one opposing these wars. You know, Trump got literally elected on a platform against forever wars, and now he's starting the biggest one. Now they send in Vance to say, like, I'm actually against this, and then he gets elected, and he has the same donors, he has the same Peter Thiel behind him. So honestly, like, from afar, I don't feel the US has that much of changing directions within their political elites, because the ones behind the political elites are in power no matter who gets elected. That's kind of my sense. But again, I don't want to die defending this position because I don't know enough about the US. What I think, what is very relevant, what we could touch upon quickly, is what does the situation in Iran mean for China? Because China does import oil from Iran. China does in general use oil imports, relies on oil imports. So rising oil prices also affects China. And I think what's very important to know is two things. One, China does have very big oil reserves compared to both Europe and to Japan, Korea. So they can last longer if everyone just needs to rely on what they have at the moment. China obviously has good relations with Russia, so they still get Russian oil, whereas I think Japan, I'm not sure about Japan, but definitely Europe does not get Russian oil and gas. And as for now, if it's up to the Iranians, they don't attack ships that bring oil towards China. So if they know that a ship is destined to China and is paid for in renminbi, they will let that ship sail through the Strait of Hormuz. So at the moment, it's a blockade against allies of the US, and it's not a general oil blockade to the world. So these are 3 points where I think China is in the best position of all the great economic powers in the world, because they have like reserves, they have access to Russia, and they have access for now to Iranian oil, even Arab oil through the Strait of Hormuz, if it's communicated well with the Iranians to know that this is going to China, don't attack this. The only question is, will the US at one point seize and attack those ships from their side? I've seen suggestions from American. There's this What's Going On with Shipping is a very interesting channel if you're interested in maritime civilian shipping. Very good channel in general, but I think the host got carried away a bit today or yesterday when he just suggested that the US should seize those Iranian oil tankers that move through the Strait of Hormuz still. And I was like, wait, are you suddenly siding with the military attacks on Iran? Because if you start seizing an Iranian tanker that's heading to China, then China has already paid for that oil. That's actually piracy.
That's piracy, yes.
And I think within the American mindset, you think like, yeah, that will work. That would put more pressure on Iran. But then again, you're actually stealing Chinese oil from the high seas. And, that's a new level of escalation against China. And China has
which in fairness, a lot of people thought they did that with Venezuela, and they didn't. Americans did not seize Chinese oil. They didn't destroy any Chinese oil. They haven't stopped Venezuelan oil from coming into China. So once it's on a ship and it's owned by China, if that ship is Chinese flagged, Chinese owned, or Chinese operated, it's allowed through the Straits of Hormuz. So that is a partial blockade. It's not a blockade. The other thing China has got is it's got its own production. It currently produces 4 million barrels a day, but it uses 16 million barrels. So it's currently about between 20 and 25% of its own needs is produced locally. And that can be doubled. That can be ramped up to 8 million barrels a day. And as you say, you rightly say that there's pipes and there's trains coming in from Kazakhstan and Russia. There's also pipes coming in through Mongolia. So there's lots of things going on. But this is one of the reasons why the US would have liked to have destabilized Xinjiang. And they're still talking about destabilizing Xinjiang because that's a most important area for land oil to come through. So it's still happening. Petrol prices have gone up here in China. I've been looking at them. I'm going to go out tomorrow on my bike and get a photograph of the price. I went out a week ago and got a photograph of the price, and I'm going to compare them. But I know for a fact they have gone up, but they're nothing like in Hong Kong.
That's another incentive to go electric. So China is smart to let those oil prices go up at the moment because people already do have the alternative to choose electric cars. And what Donald Wu says, Victor Gauss said, China has enough coal to turn into and can do without oil input in the worst scenario. I agree. China has alternatives, and that's very important. And, as long as the crisis isn't that extreme, China will avoid disrupting normal processes, because every disruption is a challenge and is risky as well. But if there's the need, China has a lot of alternatives, also because it's electrifying so quickly. Worst case.
The electrification covers most of the electrification as well. I follow a guy called David Fishman on X. Very, very smart guy. His site is called Pretentious What. At Pretentious What, which he kind of regrets setting up as a joke a few years ago. But he's a very serious commentator, and he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to the oil and the power generation industry. And basically, he points out that the NEVs, the new electric vehicles, are pretty much powered by new electricity. Sustainable electricity. It's wind, it's water, it's sun. So pretty much that's not going to affect people who drive ordinary cars. Fuel is not the big problem either. It's the production, because fuel is coming. And in fact, China makes its own fuel and exports it. I don't know if people were aware of this. All of the aviation fuel, I saw this comment that can't travel because the airfares have doubled. Well, one of the
Uh-huh.
reasons for that is China produces a lot of aviation fuel and exports it from some of the oil that it imports. Now, it's stopped doing that. And what that means is many of the countries, such as Australia, which uses a lot
Wow.
of aviation fuel from China, are having to double their airfares and halve the number of flights that they're doing.
Wow, I was not aware
Mm.
of that. Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
interesting. What I was going to mention is if people remember the days of heavy pollution in China, of air
Oh, yeah.
pollution in the 2015, 2016, 17, at that time, they had measures when heavy pollution was expected, they would cut down the traffic that was allowed in the big cities. In Beijing,
Yep.
they would just say, okay, next week we just do the number restrictions, and it's your license plate. If your
Right.
last number is odd or even, you may only drive on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or on Tuesday, Thursday, and then the next week the other way around. So suddenly you just have half the cars on the road.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
oil really becomes an issue, these are types of measures that China can easily reactivate at any moment, and including for trucks, diesel trucks, because there are now so many electric trucks that can cover for a while. It just overused the electric fleet to
Well, the
extend
number of
the
electric trucks
oil.
has increased considerably. Now, I'm going to be honest here. I don't see electric trucks in this region. I've seen them, but they're very rare down here in the Greater Bay Area. But last year, in June last year, I was cycling through Sanxi, where all the coal yards are, and
Mhm.
almost every truck, certainly more than half the trucks, were electric. So even in that
Yeah,
area where they're burning a lot of coal still and
yeah.
using a lot of coal, they've electrified their diesels. So a lot of the trucks now have got these huge, great batteries. I think they were electric. They might have been
Well,
hydrogen. I'm not sure.
it also depends which level of trucks. At least the smaller transporters
Oh, these
for
are
the
these are
for the
40
Kuwaiti,
plus
they're all
tons.
electric.
These are 40, 50 tonners.
Right. So these are the super heavy, like
Yeah.
semi trucks. These are, they are the hardest to make electric because they should travel long distance. They're super
Mm.
heavy, but that's not all logistics, right? I think in logistics, there's also the last mile logistics, where the whole Kuwaiti, like parcel transports, vegetable transports, all these things. They're done with these 8, 12 ton transport trucks, and they've been electrified rapidly over the last few
Yeah.
years. It's
In
most
up to
electric now.
3 ton trucks, almost all electric now. The 1, 2, and 3 ton trucks in
Yeah,
this area, almost 100%
exactly,
electric.
exactly. And so I think, yeah, that's a key point. The big ones, yes, they've only recently started to pick up, but yeah, that's another thing that's coming. So
Yeah.
I mean,
I, I,
many
I was
things
I
are also
was
well.
I was in Sanxi last year, and Sanxi is in the north of China. It's a huge coal mining area,
Yeah.
and there are quite a few power stations in that area still. One thing I noticed: a lot of power stations. We cycled past them, but the air was still very clean. And I
Mm,
plan always planning to make videos about this, and it never happened. But yeah, the e-trucks didn't
mm.
start last year. They were fully operational last year. So that's one good thing to know about China. Now, I don't know the range of those trucks. I don't know anything about them, but we did see, and they do have a kind of transformer look about them. They're a different look. You can tell them apart. They're
Yeah.
very, very different. So
I,
yeah,
I
they've been going in
recall
China for a long time.
I
Sorry?
recall a number from last December, where in December the e-trucks for the first time outsold gasoline diesel trucks for 1 month. And then
Mm.
people said, yeah, but that was only because some incentive ended at the end of last year. So, but it shows, yes, already these trucks are being sold, and sooner or later they will become ever more convenient.
Yeah,
And
it's
what
quite
NIO does
possible.
with the electric cars, also for trucks, they're now working on battery swapping, so that you can
Yes.
extend the range very quickly by just changing the battery and continue for long
Well, they've got
distance.
a new battery that fully charges from 10% or 7% to 90% in 5 minutes now. So that's pretty good. It's 12 minutes from start to finish, but
Yeah,
from
crazy.
from low to
You never
almost full.
charge from 0 to 100 anyway. I mean, you don't drive to zero. So if you're below 7 with an EV, I can tell you, you get very nervous. So usually if you're down to 20%, you would want to charge anyways.
I would be
And
wanting to if I was driving, that's for sure. The other thing you
90%
mentioned, the
down.
incentives.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the incentives. The incentives may have stopped, but because of what's just happening on the other side of the world, the
Yeah,
motivation now has grown. So the incentives
exactly.
may have stopped, but the motivation, there's a bit of a push and a pull going on there. We did have incentives in China to buy things like this. Now, if you wanted to trade in your car, I am quite sure you'll get a good price for it. If it's an ICE car, you'll get a good price for it if you're trading it in for an EV. But if you're trading it in for another ICE car, probably you won't. There are still incentives, and there will still
Yeah.
be a massive motivation. If the price of fuel, I believe, and I'm going to check this tomorrow, has gone up by about 5%. I think it may go up more, but at the moment it's only about 5%. The government controls all of it, so there's no price gouging. In Hong Kong, currently, the cost of a liter of fuel is 35 Hong Kong dollars. In Shenzhen, it's 10 RMB.
Wow.
So when people around the world are looking at videos of queues outside of a fuel station in China, and you've got this misinformationalists telling us that, oh, look what's happening in China. That
Yeah.
is what's happening. They're coming
Good
across the
point.
border and they're queuing up outside of the petrol stations in Shenzhen because it's 1/3 of the price. That's why
that
they're
makes
doing it.
sense. Wow, that
And
makes sense. Yeah.
e-vehicles are very rare in Hong Kong. I doubt if it's hit 5%. I'd be surprised if it's 5%. Certainly it's not 10%. Every vehicle you see is ICE.
Well, and here's the thing with the global incentive, watch Chinese EV exports this year soar because the gasoline prices worldwide are exploding. And people who are anyway thinking about buying a new car right now, they will think 2 and 3 times if they don't want to switch to electric right now because they see those prices. So I think this
Hybrid
is
might be the answer. A lot of hybrid cars in Hong Kong, but they're not electric, they're hybrid. There are actually, Tesla are quite popular. Tesla are the one that you see most of in Hong Kong.
I know that BYD also exports a lot of hybrid, and in some places, why not? But in general, I think watch the export numbers. I think in that respect, China will be a big winner of the oil prices, at least.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's caused by the deaths of lots of innocent Iranians. Unfortunately,
I'm not endorsing the war. I'm just saying
oil prices. But it's going to see a benefit. The one country that's going to benefit from this terrible time is probably going to be China. I think on that happy note, we've been at it for an hour and a half. I think it might be time to say goodbye, thank you, and good night to everybody. It's, what is it, 4:30 here. So people in Australia, it's 6:30 dinner time. In New Zealand, it's even later. Thank you all very much. I know Donut is in New Zealand. We've got the XYVVV is in South Africa. So we've got a nice global mix here.
Wow, cool. Yeah. Nice. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks for having me, Jerry.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.